Y'all picture this now. It's 1997 and one of the whole wide world's most famous supermodels is strutting down an Yves Saint Laurent runway over in Paris. Them cameras are a-flashin', the whole crowd holds its breath, and that gal Yasmeen moves with that spellbinding walk that made old Karl Lagerfeld go weak in the knees. What, folks? I don't know is that this here is goodbye. At 26 years old, at the very peak of her whole career, she's fixin' to do something just unthinkable. In a business that flat out worships being young and pretty, she's just gonna walk away. Not on account of no scandal, not 'cause of some bad habit, not 'cause the work done dried up. No, seer. She's leavin' 'cause she's just too real for a world built on smoke and mirrors. Now this here is the story of a woman who went and broke every rule in the book twice. First, by stepping into the fashion world as the daughter of a Pakistani preacher man. The things my daddy taught me have truly, even with me maybe not, gone down the path he wanted for me to take. They still stuck with me. I reckon he raised me up to, be a good person. Then, by leaving it all behind, when everybody figured she was gonna stay forever. Now, inside a McDonald's on a busy old afternoon, a 17-year-old Yasmeen is back there flipping burgers, with the kinda get-it-done way that made her employee of the month. She's tall, pretty as a peach, and with no earthly idea that her whole life was fixin' to turn on a dime. Now, what makes this whole thing something special? Ain't just that a gal who'd become a famous model was slinging burgers. It's that, bless her heart, she wasn't even supposed to be there at all. You see, Yasmeen was born into two different worlds that had no business ever crossin' paths. Her daddy was a well-respected preacher man up in Quebec, a Muslim fella who spent his days teaching folks about faith and being devout. And her mama, Linda, well, she'd gone from being Catholic to joining the Muslim faith, taking on a life of being modest and sticking to the old ways. This sure wasn't the kind of house where y'all talked about a career on the runway over supper. Why, when she was just 12 years old, Yasmeen had made that big ol' Hajj journey all the way to Mecca with her mama and daddy, while all the other kids her age were fretting over school dances and such. She was walking through the most sacred places in the whole Muslim faith, learning about giving things up and deep down faith. That whole experience, it really left a mark on her. This notion that some things are just plain holy and that you don't put everything out there for the whole world to see. But growing up in Montreal, being the only Muslim kid in her whole school, little Yasmeen felt like she was living smack dab between two different worlds. The other kids, they called her half boy and half girl, 'cause she was as flat as a pancake and clumsy as a newborn calf. They picked on her something fierce, on account of her Pakistani kin, and made fun of for being different. Her own daddy was out there teaching communities about faith while his little girl was learning what it felt like to be an outsider. She said later on, she saw herself as just an ugly duckling, this long-legged mixed-blood girl who didn't fit in anywhere, Pakistani enough to be treated like a stranger up in Canada, and Canadian enough to feel like she didn't belong when she went to visit family overseas. She was learning how to navigate who she was in a way that most young'uns never have to. When that hair fella Edward Zachariah moseyed on into that McDonald's and spotted her behind the counter, he saw something no one else had ever seen. Not some exotic beauty, just pure potential, raw, unformed, but it was sure as shootin' there. The conversation they had after that would tear her family apart. Her folks' reaction was quick, and it was a hard blow. This wasn't about worrying over a career or her safety. For her daddy, his daughter's dream of being a model was a crisis of the soul. Everything he'd ever taught her about modesty, about keeping your body covered, about being humble, well, modeling was the dead opposite of all of it. Yasmeen later said that her father believed she was putting his soul on the line for a trip straight to damnation just for thinking on it. Picture this now, you're just 17 years old, and hearing that your biggest dream might just send the one person you love more than anything to the devil himself. But bless her heart, she'd gone on for years feeling like a ghost feeling. All wrong, like a crooked picture on the wall, like she just didn't fit in nowhere at all. Then for the very first time, somebody was telling her she was pretty enough to have her picture taken. This little gal who'd been told she was plain as a mud fence was getting a shot to go and show 'em all what pretty really was, so she decided to go on and break her daddy's heart. At 17 years old, she lit out from Montreal for Europe hauling a little old suitcase and the heavy burden of her family's heartache. She was chasing after something she couldn't even put a name to yet. It wasn't fame and it wasn't money, just that feeling of finally belonging somewhere. Milan, 1989. Yasmeen moseys on into her first big time cattle call, carrying every last thing she owned in the world, and talking some busted-up Italian. She's all of 19 years old, all alone, and fixin' to find out that the whole fashion world wasn't any more ready for her than her own folks had been. Well, that no came swift, and it was mighty specific. Them Canadian casting fellas had already gone and told her she was too exotic looking. Now over there in Europe, she was hearing different tunes of that same old song. Not pale-skinned enough for some of the money men, not different enough for other folks said she was too tall, too serious, too dang real. But there was just something about that gal that kept them picture takers calling her right back. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, or the bit of sorrow she held in her eyes, or the simple fact that she treated every single job like it truly mattered. While other models might mosey in, late or looking a little worse for wear, Yasmeen was always early, prepared and just plain grateful. Her big break came with Jean-Paul Gaultier back in 1990. He put her up on his runway, and all of a sudden, the fashion world started paying real close attention. Her walk wasn't like nobody else's, this real fluid, almost snake-like kind of movement that Tyra Banks would later on call the walk of life. Tyra said watching Yasmeen move was like you thought her hips were fixin' to pop right out of place, but somehow it all looked easy as Sunday morning and natural as could be. There was a model by the name of Yasmeen Ghauri. Now, you folks that know your fashion from back in the 90s, Yasmeen, she had the walk of life. When she would get to walkin', it was almost like her hips would just come unhitched. It was just this peculiar kind of thing. And then later on, she was a Victoria's Secret model. And that Yasmeen, she wouldn't let a single makeup artist lay a finger on her face. By 1991, she was a walk-in for Gianni, Versace, for Chanel, for them big-name designers, who'd built their whole empires on a mighty particular kind of thing, a real particular idea of what's pretty, and bless her heart, Yasmeen was quietly turning that whole idea on its head just by being who she was. But the whole business's lack of being ready for a gal like her was downright shameful and just kept on happening. Them makeup artists didn't carry no foundation for that pretty olive skin of hers. She'd show up to a shoot and have to stand there and watch them scramble around, trying to mix up shades, and end up making her skin look all washed out and gray under them big old lights. So, she just up and learned to do it her own self. Just picture this now. You're booked solid for a Chanel show. You're fixin' to walk for Karl Lagerfeld, his own self himself. And there you are in the powder room about 20 minutes before showtime, doing your own base. Makeup 'cause not a blessed soul thought to bring something for your skin tone. Instead of raising a ruckus or making a bunch of demands, that Yasmeen gal just handled the problem. She went out and bought her own foundation, learned how to blend it just perfect, and showed up ready to get to work. It wasn't some kind of protest. It was just plain surviving. But it was also, in its own quiet way, something that changed the whole dang game. She was carving out a spot for herself in a world that hadn't even bothered to save her a seat. Her first cover of Elle magazine came out in January of 1991. That very same year, she became the pretty face of Christian Dior and Anne Klein. But the thing that really set her apart wasn't just her looks. It was the way she went about her business. While other models were off putting on a show, chasing down them headlines, playing that whole celebrity game, Yasmeen just got down to business. She'd show up, do her work prettier than a bluebonnet field, and head on home. She didn't go running her mouth about the other gals, didn't stir up no trouble, and didn't go whisperin' tales to the papers. In a business built plumb full of made-up characters, she was stubborn as a mule. You might even say feisty about just being herself. Come 1992, something had changed. When old Karl Lagerfeld needed a gal to kick off a Chanel show, he picked her. When that fella Patrick de Marquillier was fixin' to take pictures for Vogue, she was the one he wanted in front of his camera. Her way of walking had become a real fashion legend. Why? The New York Times even wrote about that look in her eye that was hard to pin down, but you couldn't miss the smooth as silk sway of her hips. Lagerfeld himself said the other gals tried to copy that walk of hers, but it ain't easy 'cause nobody's got them long legs or the build of Yasmeen. It was what that walk stood for. That perfect mix of being sure of herself and a little bit tender of strength and grace. She moved like a lady who knew exactly who in the heck she was. She was also making history. When Victoria's Secret signed her on back in 1992, she went and became one of the first ladies of color to be a big-name angel, at a time when that brand's idea of pretty was mighty narrow. So seeing Yasmeen's face in there Little Books was a quiet kind of earthquake. The covers just kept on rolling in. Italian Vogue, French Vogue, British Vogue, every single one. Featured this woman who wasn't like any other gal you'd ever seen on the magazine rack. Not that. Blonde-haired, blue-eyed dream that had run the whole show for decades. But something with more layers to it, more interesting. Why Stephen Meisel himself put her on the cover of Italian Vogue and Azzedine Alaya. Well, he got plumb obsessed with putting his clothes on her. She was strutting her stuff in darn near every big show in Paris, Milan, and New York. Now this here was the high noon of the supermodel days when the models weren't just pretty faces. They were whole brands, big personalities, forces of nature. And Yasmeen, she was the quiet one, the one who let her pictures do all the talking for her. But even when she was at the top of the heap, there was something different about the way she wore her success. She didn't pack up and move to New York to go hunting for the limelight. She didn't go courting. No rock and rollers or movie stars. She didn't show her face. At every last shindig, she was known for keeping to herself in a business that handed out prizes for showing off. Professional in a world that was all about living too big. The real McCoy in a business built on pure make-believe. The mid-90s, that right there ought to been Yasmeen's time to shine, to go from a big-time supermodel to a real, honest-to-goodness legend, just like them gals Naomi and Cindy and Christy had done. Now this was back when them models started putting their names on things, product lines and courting movie stars and such, building whole empires bigger than the catwalk itself. But not Yasmeen, bless her heart. She stayed true to who she'd always been, while all them other fillies were jumping into that whole three-ring circus of fame. She kept her boots planted firm on the ground. She didn't go hiring no slick talkers to get her name in them fancy papers. She didn't take up with no fella famous enough to stir up a lick of gossip. She just didn't play the same old game everyone else was playing. Now that wasn't no highfalutin plan. It was just her being genuine. The same genuineness that had given her the grit to walk away from her family's church, and the same stuff that made her put on her own war paint when the so-called experts couldn't get it right, that kept her punching the clock when other folks might have just thrown in the towel. And them fashion folks, they took notice. Here was a gal at the tippy top of the heap, prettier than a bluebonnet field, and successful as all get out, who acted like all that success hadn't changed her one bit. She was still that polite, hard-workin' gal from way up north in Montreal who showed up 'fore the sun did, and always said her thank yous. Them designers just doted on her, 'cause she made their fancy threads look as easy as breathin', and the picture takers, they loved her too, 'cause she brought something real to every single snapshot image. Them other models, they held her in high regard, 'cause she never played dirty politics or tried to rustle up their jobs. But that straight shootin' nature of hers was also making her something of a maverick in her own line of work. Fashion, it lives and breathes on changing folks up, on the notion that you can become somebody brand spankin' new. Yasmeen was proving that some folks are just themselves no matter what they got on. Wearin'. She'd strut in them shows wearin' millions of dollars worth of duds. Her face plastered on magazine covers all across the whole wide world. Her name was spoken in the same breath as the biggest stars of that time, but she never seemed to buy into all that tall talk about her own fame. Her buddies from back then recollect her as being surprisingly down to earth. She'd mosey on up to a shoot, do the work something beautiful, and then want to chew the fat about books or politics or dang near anything except fashion. She treated that modeling gig like a job, not her whole life story. That was a whole new kind of thing in its own quiet way, in a business that told all the gals they needed to be perfect, to be putting on a show all the time. Yasmeen was just herself. The whole business didn't know what in the Sam Hill to do with. Somebody who made it to the top without selling her soul. Someone who could be getting her picture took in the most highfalutin duds in the whole wide world and still seem like a real person underneath. But I reckon that's the very reason what happened next was bound to happen. Come October 1996, Yasmeen was all set to walk in an Eve Street Laurent show, one of the most important jobs in all of fashion. At the last minute, she just up and quits. No reason why, no sorry ma'am, just gone. A few months on down the road, in 1997, She's walking in another YSL show with that same old mesmerizing stride, the same pure D professionalism. But somewhere during that show, she makes a choice that's gonna shock. A whole business built on worshiping the young and the beautiful. She was done. At 26 years old, at the very top of her game, with money rolling in and everybody telling her she could work for another 10 years, easy, Yasmeen decides to retire from modeling. No scandal ran her off. No bad habits, no falling apart, no awful write-up. She wasn't getting older, or less pretty, or less talked about. If anything, she was wanted more than ever. She just plain stopped. The business didn't get it back then, and Lord knows, it still don't get it now. Models don't retire when they're on top. They just fade on out. Bit by bit, take on smaller gigs, move on into different parts of the fashion world. They don't just up and walk away from millions of dollars and being famous the world over just because they feel like it. But that's precisely what Yasmeen did. She finished up her obligations, said her goodbyes to the folks that mattered, and just disappeared. In a matter of months, she was hitched to Ralph Bernstein, a Jewish lawyer fella who didn't know a thing about fashion. They moved on up to upstate New York, about as far from the runways of Paris as a person could rightly get. The difference was something else. One day, she was walking for the most famous designers in the whole wide world. The very next day, she was a new bride in a quiet town in New York, learning to build a life that had nothing at all to do with beauty or fashion or fame. Her kids were going to be raised Jewish, even though she herself had grown up Muslim. Her husband was from a whole other world. Everything about her new life was something she chose, not something handed down to her. What happened next was nearly as remarkable as the career that came before it. Yasmeen just vanished. Not in a big showy way, not with some announcement or a big farewell tour. She just stepped on out of that fashion world and never once looked back. While all them other supermodels from her time came back round, started up their own outfits, showed up in them picture shows. But Yasmeen, she chose to be quiet. Just plain, dead set, almost a mysterious kind of quiet. For 25 long years, she raised up her young'uns, her little girl Maya and her boy Victor, way up there in New York State. She did a heap of good work for folks, or so they say, but she kept all that quiet. She didn't go talking to no reporters, didn't show her face at them fancy fashion get-togethers, didn't even mosey on over to any of the old reunions. All the while, the fashion world kept on spinning without her, but it never did plumb forget about her. As that whole business slowly started to open its arms to all sorts of different people in the 2000s and the 2010s, the folks who write the fashion history books started seeing just what all Yasmeen had done. She was, called a true trailblazer, one of the very first women of color to bust on through to the tippy top. The mark she left was talked about in them look-back articles, but the woman herself was nowhere to be seen. Other models from her day and time stayed right there in the spotlight in all sorts of ways. They'd pop up on them reality shows, be the judges at modeling contests, get hitched to famous folks, start selling their own skin lotions and such. That whole fame machine found ways to keep folks talking about them. But Yasmeen, she wanted no part of that business. Her just being gone became a piece of her whole story. Them fashion folks would go and mention her name right alongside that Naomi girl, Linda and Christy, but always with a bit of a question mark hanging over her. Folks started wondering, whatever in the world happened to Yasmeen? That became a question folks kept asking. It was something you just didn't hear tell of. Someone who'd had a taste of that kind of big-time fame and fortune, who'd been told they were right up there with the most beautiful women on God's green earth, just choosing to fade away and finding some real peace in it. That whole business that once had a heck of a time trying to figure her out now had to wrestle with her just being gone. In a line of work built on the idea that being famous is the be-all and end-all, Yasmeen went and proved that some folks are looking for something else altogether. June of 2022. After 25 long years of keeping quiet, a picture pops up on the old Instagram that makes the whole fashion world stop dead in its tracks. It ain't nothing fancy, real casual, just two ladies having a cup of coffee, smiling at the camera. One of them is Helena Christensen, that Danish supermodel who'd pretty much stayed in the spotlight all these years. The other one is Yasmeen, with streaks of silver shining in her hair, not wearing a lick of makeup, looking exactly like what she is. A woman in her 50s who's lived a good, full life far away from all the cameras. The little note under it was simple. Just said something about getting back together with an old friend after 25 years, but Lord have mercy, The reaction was right then and bigger than a blue norther. The old hands from the fashion world lit up the comment section. Old Christy Turlington and Amber Valletta were saying just how much they'd missed seeing Yasmeen. Why even Bella? Hadid called them all legends. That post took off like a wildfire through the fashion crowd, not cause of any big old drama or some kind of scandal, but on account of pure affection. And what's so striking about how folks took, it ain't just the love, but the pure respect. Nobody's asking why she up and left. Ain't a soul pushing her to come on back. Nobody treats her showing up again on them social pages as anything less than a pure gift. There's just this understanding that she'd earned the right to just ride off into the sunset, and that her coming back even for a minute ought to be celebrated with no strings attached. A couple more posts trickled in. Yasmeen shared some pictures from back in her modeling days, gave a nod to notes from old friends, and gave us a little peek into the life she's living now, all centered on her family and doing good works. But there weren't no big comeback announcement, no. Not a whisper that she was aiming to get back to modeling. It's plain as day she ain't trying to take back her spot in fashion. She's just saying howdy. She'd already proved that walking away from all that glitter don't make your mark any smaller. If anything, her being gone had only made her legend grow. She wasn't remembered as some gal who just couldn't let go, staying relevant, or wrestled with finding a new trail for herself after the modeling was done. She was remembered as the one gal who'd known the exact right time to hang up her boots. That coffee get-together with Helena came to stand for something a whole lot bigger. The notion that a real deal friendship could take root in a business built on outdoing the next gal, the sheer power of picking a private life over the flashbulbs, the plain old guts to let your guard down without putting on a show about it. Here you had two women who'd been captured on film by the world's finest artists, who'd strutted down the most highfalutin runways, who'd been told time and again they were amongst the prettiest women of their time, and there they were, just sharing a coffee like any two old friends, who hadn't seen hide nor hair of each other in ages. The silver in Yasmeen's hair wasn't tucked away or excused. Her face, without a dab of fancy makeup or bright lights, was still a sight to behold, but more important, it was peaceful. That's what being truly content looks like. In that one single photograph, she'd given the fashion world a gift it don't hardly ever get. Proof that there's life after the limelight, happiness after walking on away, a genuineness that holds up through decades of silence. She'd always been too real for a business built on make-believe. But at the end of the day, that keeping it real is what made her a true legend. In this old world that's always telling women folk to keep on chasing after youth and staying important forever, Yasmeen, she went and chose a different path. She chose to be a flesh and blood person, and somehow that's what made her a bigger icon than any fancy ad campaign or magazine cover ever could have.